Hello again. I am Matt Gemmell here once more with some e-ink related stuff. Still trying to work out what sort of trademark intro I should have for these videos. Like Jeffrey Moss's affable hello there, or Kit Betts Masters, did I accidentally skip 10 seconds into the video because he's already in the middle of talking about something? But I jest. We'll figure out the video ident later. For now, I thought I would try showing the Supernote Nomad in an actual work situation for me as a novelist. And one of the main things that I get benefit from on e-ink devices within the realm of work, aside from proofreading and the annotating that goes with it, of course, is in planning books. Now, I'm not going to actually try and plan a completely new novel in front of you because it would take incredibly long and it would be so bitty and disjointed as for you to probably think I was a dullard, but I will cheat slightly by trying to replicate how I planned my first book, which is called Changer. Turned out to be the first in an ongoing series of techno thrillers. I didn't really plan it out as much as I probably should have at the time. There's another video on that, by the way, but I'm going to, because it's so familiar to me, I'm going to use it as the basis of showing you how I use the Supernote's features within the context of planning out a book. So this may work, it may not work. Let's find out. Let's switch over to the Supernote here on the desk beside me. So here we go. I'm just going to make a new notebook. I'm within my work folder already. As you can see, within the note folder, I've got a work folder. I talked about that in a video the other day, so I'm going to make a new notebook. There we go. And I mean, I obviously know what the book is called, but at this stage I normally wouldn't know. I would still have to figure that out. Maybe I'd use a temporary title, but we'll go with the actual one for the moment. Didn't quite get that C. I need to practice my capital C's, I think. Okay, let's just let it correct. And then we go. So where do I tend to start with planning a book? Well, typically there is the central sort of the germ of an idea. There's just sometimes it's a scene or a piece of dialogue, but usually it's just a sort of abstract, not even an elevator pitch, whatever the subset of an elevator pitch is. And I remember that with Changer, it was this idea of what if the effect of something came before the thing itself, you know, effect before cause. So I would probably write that down. Effect before cause. And I just kind of try to go from there and try and think what that leads me to. And I just scribble them down in a sort of word cloud, if you like. So we've got causality, which is reversed. I just love the idea that you would see the outcome before the thing that caused it, and I thought I could do something with that. And this obviously makes me think of outcomes, and then whether we are solely the ones to determine outcomes, and you've got will and all that sort of thing, and whether there's a certain preordainedness. And I remember early on I came up with this word, destiny, and I remembered really liking it because it was sort of grandiose, and I knew that it was going to be important. On Supernote, what I would do is, do it better than that. I would draw a star. Why are you not recognising my beautiful stars? There we go, that one was recognised. I'll get rid of the other two, because stars we can come back to later. So this makes me think about plans and intent and all this stuff, and free will there, you know, that you require agency to have free will. And I do remember thinking about agency, and this took me in two different directions when I was thinking about it originally, because there's these two sort of senses. There's agency as in your power to act, basically, like, you know, your control over things. And then of course we also use agency to, it can be like an organization of some kind, and that was something that turned out to be important when I was thinking about this. So if you're going to have reverse causality, we are obviously dealing with physics here, even though it's not real, proper, actual physics. It's, you know, novel fiction physics where you're sort of making things up. And this series is very much about fringe science and oddness like that. But I knew that it would need to be at least explained within the story in the context of some form of physics. And this turned out to have quite an influence as well. So there's enough there that we begin to get some kind of sense of the core flavour of what's going on, even if none of the details exist. With the main thing, of course, being this, what we started with, effect before cause, and how that would actually look, and what physics are, and what it's based on, and so on. So here, this is sort of the free association for me, you know, just raw ideas. So what I would do is just make that ideas and lasso it, make that into a heading, so that I've got that in my notebook. And I mean, this could mean so many things. What could the physics be? What's it all about? And that's the sort of place you can get hung up as a writer, because you feel the need to get concrete really quickly, and you often can't, and it can be a stalling point. I've learned from experience it's often better to try and fill in some of this stuff retroactively, rather when you're coming back a bit later and you get more of an idea of the who and what. So let's go to the who. What you need, of course, is you need a protagonist. So that's a natural next section. Heading, make that a heading as well. These are just different visual styles. They are not, it's not H1, H2, H3, H4. It would be nice if Supernote offered that ability. They may do in the future, but for now those are all top level, although there's a way around that to sort of get some hierarchy, a wee trick that I use, which I'll hopefully remember to show you later. So this was my first novel, and protagonist, who's the protagonist going to be? Well, I mean, God, there's going to be strong elements of me in there, and you can't avoid that. And with Changer, the me aspect of it, or the wish fulfillment me aspect of it, comes across very strongly. It's an indulgence, it's fun, it lets you write what you know, and as I said, to some extent it's pretty unavoidable. So this brings me back to this physics thing, because what you need then is someone to understand the physics. And why shouldn't that be the protagonist? So that's a pretty obvious linkage. I can link to another page in current file and it's the protagonist. And these links, they're not attached to a page number, they're attached to the specific page. So if I later insert further pages between, say, page 2 and page 3, the link will still work, which is what you would probably expect, certainly what you would hope, and it is the case. You get a wee link icon and then you can navigate around as you wish, and these headings fill into a table of contents just there in the headings section, other sections of which we'll get to later on, but you have noticed stars there, and it has got that page that I added a star to. I use stars as stuff to go back to and further address. I do that in Ulysses as well on the iPad via a different mechanism. So, the protagonist, me. Let's have a physicist. Always have to think how to spell that one. And he obviously has to get involved in the story, but it raises a question. Not why does he get involved? We'll contrive that in some way, but why does he remain involved? Because this already doesn't sound like the sort of situation that your average physicist would be best suited to do anything but understand and explain. We're going to need some rather more dynamic people. And so as soon as I think about that, I think two more things, basically. It leads me to two realizations. And the first one is need more protagonists. I almost never write out protagonists, I just use protag, sometimes with a abbreviating full stop at the end of it, sometimes not. But if I write protag at any point, it is just protagonist. I'm just so used to not writing the full word out. Same for for antagonists. So that's the first realization. And the second sort of, perhaps not realization, but thought that is prompted is the physicist more than just a physicist, you know? And since we are dealing with weird science and causality reversal and all that, then this leads quite naturally, for me at least, to the question of, with all this causality reversal business, is there some kind of like personal ability involved? And that's an interesting question, which I would probably want to come back to. I'm terrible at drawing stars, but it recognised that one, so that's going to become an important point later. So we need more protagonists. By virtue of saying that this is me, we can probably fill in all the details later. I'm thinking Scottish, yay! And he's probably going to vaguely resemble me physically. As to the background, I am not a physicist. I am a computing science by degree. Obviously, I'm a novelist now, but I've certainly studied physics to a certain level, and again, it's weird science stuff. I can fill in with research and just bloody making stuff up. So this is the main protagonist. I typically defer actual names until later because, again, you can get so stuck on names. It can be difficult to decide on names sometimes. I typically, if it's a nationality whose language and common names I'm not as familiar with, I'll look for popular names from that country for a certain time period that suits the setting of a novel, needing to take into account the fact that popular names are typically recorded for years of birth, and you need to offset it by the age of the character. I mean, you don't have to use any of that diligence at all. You can just make something up, of course, but that's typically how I get a vague idea. And then I mix and match forenames and surnames. And when I find something that sounds good to me and is readable to an English speaker and has a suggested pronunciation immediately as soon as you read it, even if it's not from your native country, then what I do is I basically do 2 checks. The first one is, punch it into search engine and make sure that it's not actually someone famous. You don't want to do that, mostly because it can create unwanted associations in the mind of the reader if they happen to know who it is or if they Google it later on. And the other check is good to make sure that if at all possible, your characters at least don't have surnames that begin with the same letter, because when the reader's just starting to read the book, they're still learning who everyone is. That can be a bit confusing, and you will often notice in novels that don't have vast casts that coincidentally everyone has got a surname that begins with a different letter, and you've never actually noticed that before. But if that's the case, then it's likely, for ease of introducing you to the cast early on without causing any confusion. But again, it's not a rule, you can break that if you want. So this is the main the main protagonist, if you will, and I don't tend to do names, so I would just list by their either their story role or their occupation or such, anything that's immediately identifiable. And so I probably want a heading for this, because it seems now that protagonist is not just like a page, it's a section, and it's going to have subsections. So what I would do is grab this, and this is where we come to the lack of hierarchy in the headings. And the way you can sort of fake that out is that anything you select and mark as a heading is shown in this wee list here, like everything that you grab, including exclamation marks or scribbles or whatever. So what I tend to do for a subsection is just, if I sort of make it a indented thing, you could have a hyphen or a bullet point or whatever, and if I select that, the whole thing as a title, and maybe I'll choose a different colour just to distinguish it on the page for myself. Come on you, there we go. Then when you go in here, it kind of looks indented, even though from the point of view of the software, these are all top level headings, and you can kind of just do it that way. So super tip for you. I didn't see that anywhere, I just sort of found myself doing it. I'm not claiming it's ingenious or anything like that, but there you have it. So more protagonists, we're coming back to the ability thing. So let's roll on a page. This is the last page, 3 of 3, but you can just swipe to get another page at any time. And if you want to fiddle about with page orders, you can do stuff here. You can long press, you can see insert after, insert before. You can flip along to the next bit of this toolbar to move or to delete. That's where you control all of that. Quite often in Supernote, in lists and grids and stuff, long pressing activates an edit mode that gives you additional interface to do stuff. But we don't need that right now, and I will quickly get rid of that. Double tap in the wee bottom toolbar hides it, and it's a 2-finger tap in the middle of the screen, which I didn't do very well there, that hides and shows the toolbar. You get this wee icon as well, although in the prefs you can hide even that. So there we go. We're still in the protagonist section, which I suppose should really be protagonists plural just now. But what we need is, the more capable person, basically. We need someone who's more suited to action and dealing with emerging situations and drama and all that, a sort of runny, shooty, highly trainedy kind of person. So who's that going to be? Goodness, we need. I mean, the thing that immediately jumps to mind, of course, is some kind of military person. So we shall say, go a captain, because it sounds awesome, and because I know how this story ends. Haha. Grab that, make it a wee title. I think I used the second level, or rather it's not the second level, but the second option in there. Voila. And this is going to be someone who takes action. Again, just word association. We might also want this person at a much later time to be a love interest, possibly, and that might be a different character, but again, I am coming to this with the benefit of foreknowledge of the future of the whole series, so that's a crap drawing, but there you go. And what we need here is what sort of popped into the edge of our mind a few pages earlier. You need agency in the story. You need the ability to act, the power to act, the power to control a situation, as opposed to respond to a situation in a general sort of philosophical sense. But also you have this double meaning. You know, an agency can be an organisation, and certainly the military is just such a thing. The United States is obviously extremely well served in English language fiction, and I don't live in the United States. I am a European and Scottish, and so the thinking, and I can't really draw wee tiny like starry stars because it'll interpret it as those remember stuff stars, so I'll just draw wee fake stars. So thinking is, why don't we make it the EU? These would be the wee gold stars. And that lovely dark blue flag. Again, crappy drawings, but that's what's in my mind. So let's think military. And EU, I think I drew that very well. Because that gives the benefit of a very large organisation and their resources, and importantly, it gives us access to the settings of the EU and all the trappings of those settings, the exotic stuff that makes techno thrillers great. So at this point, I'd be inclined to make a new top level heading here, and we're going to say the EU. And probably, since we're dealing with the military in the EU, you're then probably dealing with the European Defence Agency, which means Brussels, because that's where it's headquartered. And the great thing, as I said, the sort of resources of the setting is we're going to be getting the benefit of languages and nationalities and of course the history and architecture and just all of it, all of that glorious stuff. The condiments and the spices of a story, and yet the globe-trotting thing and interesting character backgrounds, etc., etc. So, I mean, we're starting to get an idea here. And as I come back to this, I remember thinking, well, you know, instead of doing the love interest is since the main protagonist is male and heterosexual, and instead of just bringing a woman in some side role, since the protagonist is kind of also a side role in terms of the action, because he's a scientist rather than you know, something a bit more traditionally action hero, then why don't we do this very thing? So let's make this a woman. And what's the woman going to be like? Well, when you, oh God, terrible writing there, excuse that, that is meant to be an O. Well, when you find not just that you make yourself the protagonist, but also that you tend to find people from your life coming in as other characters as well, or combinations of people from your life, and it's you don't have to resist that, I don't think, as long as you are cognizant of it and control it from being, you know, a sort of Mary Sue kind of situation over and over and over again. And the time that I was actually planning this book, I remember thinking, this character, the captain, who would she be like? And all I could think was that she would be, in some ways, like this girl that I met at university. Oh God, I wonder what she's doing now. Well, I know what she's doing now. She's downstairs and she's in her office and she's working away, because we've been together ever since. And reader, I married her. So in some ways, Captain was based on my wife. In some ways, very much not the case. But I mean, my wife doesn't have much of a way with guns or anything like that, thank God. My life might have been cut short if that were the case, but there are personality elements and so on. And I remember jumping from this character, the sort of capable protagonist, as it were, to the EU setting. And the other thing that was buzzing through my head then was this second meaning of agency, you know? Because getting involved in the weird science stuff, it wouldn't just be like regular soldiery type people. There's a covert aspect to it, right? You know, so we have this question of that other meaning of agency, that question of an organisation, and that of course is hand in hand with techno thrillers and fringe science and all that. You've got the conspiracy element, and at that point you've got a sort of another, it's not quite a cast member because it's not human, but you've got the organisation, and so that definitely deserves another top level heading. And I remember sitting in this armchair we had in the place we were living at the time and thinking about it, and I mean it's murder trying to think of you know, a name for a secret organisation attached to the military, because everything, depending on how you're feeling at the time, everything sounds either too bland or too cheesy or done before or whatever. You just need to power through it. But I remember trying to think through it and saying, well, okay, how do we deconstruct this? So we've got kind of that idea of kind of global reach, even though of course EU jurisdiction is limited in most respects to the borders of that union. But you've at least got the sort of the globe-trotting nature, the go anywhere, you know, the ubiquity. And I really liked the idea of having a logo of some kind, not just for branding in the marketing a book sense, but like, you know, shoulder patches on uniforms or other ways that it would work its way into the story, and that was purely an indulgence on my part. I mean, would a covert branch of the military have a uniquely identifying logo that was shown anywhere outside their own most private headquarters? Probably not, but it's a wee bit less fun that way. So, you know, I'm the writer, I get to do what I want, so there. So there's this idea of ubiquity, but it's got to be like a sort of extremely special circumstances team, right? And oh, boom, we're thinking about a team. That's worth writing down. So it's small, but extremely capable. And I thought, it's careful how I say this. There can be a tendency in US-centric stuff to do that American thing with bombast and hyperbole and so on. You know, everything's named according to the 13-year-old boy assessment of what sounds cool. You know, and that certainly comes up when you're looking at the actual names of firearms and munitions and all that stuff, and even mission names that have leaked out into public knowledge. And I thought, well, I want to get away from that. I want there to be not an element of humility as such, but of a judicious sort of, like an unassuming, you know. And that made me think again of ubiquity, you know. Something, they can be everywhere, basically. They can go anywhere, but in a, you know, covert, suitable, unassuming sort of way. But, you know, obviously with the ability to get the job done. And what it made me think of, more than anything, maybe quite predictably, was you know, like birds of prey, because European birds of prey, we're not talking like the big golden eagle or whatever, but definitely still can be dangerous and roaming far around within the purview of the EU. And I got thinking about it, and what I settled on, which you'll know by now, is a bird of prey, which is small, and you wouldn't at first think it was terribly dangerous, and they're bloody everywhere. But the kestrel had a certain ring to it in that context, and when I was thinking about it and planning, I'd sort of primed myself for it, and it just clicked all of a sudden in the way that these things do when you're thinking creatively. Sometimes you just get that sort of lightning bolt, and you know, there I had it, the organisation name. So I remember sitting in the chair, and then I was doing that on it was a wee MacBook Air, I think, and I typed it up, just these things I've been saying to you just now, and then I shut the lid because I knew that anything else I did at that moment, or the next half an hour, or that evening, would detract from where I was. That was a place to leave it for the night, most definitely. And then, of course, much later, I gave the idea. None of this. I didn't sketch this. I gave the idea to book cover designer, and he came up with the logo and everything whilst doing the artwork for the book, and it's been there ever since. So that's a wee bit of a digression from what we're doing here. We're talking about the things that are associated with the protagonist, but it raises the need, of course, for the balance in the other part of the story. And the reason I jumped to settings is not because I want to talk more about settings, but because I want to insert a page just to show how that done, so I want before page 5, I hit insert before, that's a new page 5, which we'll get to in a wee second, and I made a link previously, so, and I told you that the link would be preserved even if I shuffled things about, and I don't think I've inserted a page prior to this, but at least you can see it does work. So we've got this page, which is of course for the other part of the whole thing, antagonist. I'm not actually convinced I got all of that there. We can find out in a wee second. Beep. Have a look. Did I just get the N? I did, look at that. I had a feeling. It's one of these lassos where you need to really encompass everything. It's not it'll get anything that you touch a part of. It's a strictly containing lasso. So there we go. Antagonist. Now, I had some thoughts about this. So the scale of the story, at this point I'd started to think that the thing that happened that came sort of backwards was a disaster. You know, some kind of terrible disaster, but bear in mind with this, the effect before the cause, the disaster was yet to come, but in some way its effects had been felt already, so the effects, the outcome of the disaster were the early warning signs of the disaster itself yet to happen. Now that's really interesting, to me at least, maybe it's not to you, but that was very quickly the thing that I was most excited about. And when you use words like disaster, you've got this issue of scale, you know, it's big. And given that you've got a covert sort of military organisation involved on one side, on the protagonist side, the flip side of that is the mirror of it is that there has to be a conspiracy on the other side. So there has to be a sort of equal level of scale, and thus I quickly realised another symmetry in that there needed to be more than one sort of level of antagonist. You know, you need the sort of big scale, the kind of mastermind aspect. But you also need the threat. And this is a sort of like, you know, the planning and behind the scenes and all that. But you also need the sort of the present, like active, personal, like conflict provider and participant kind of threat, you know? And there's often a hierarchical relationship, of course, with this person telling this person what to do and setting them on our protagonist. But what quite often happens, and what ended up happening here, is that you know, the tables were turned and that hierarchy was inverted. A lot of inversion and reversal happening here. And when you find these reflections and these symmetries and that sort of fractal quality, it's usually a good sign. It's usually that your brain settled onto a fairly a sort of consistent path that's got some you know, some inherent kind of like balance to it. So I know that I needed the two sides of it, and that this side would be associated with power and money, and to get that word in, conspiracy, and the other side really needed to be the foil for the military organisation, because all these words are very sort of military related words. And you need danger, and you probably need someone that's a killer and all that stuff. So I'm thinking this is the real villain, you know? And at that point, I remember thinking, well, wait a wee minute. You've got the physicist problem. You've got this physicist problem here. And I mean, if I was having a brainstorming session, what I could do is pull up the stars and it would take me, and I would be able to find these problems to come back to. Sorry, Destiny. But it was the physicist problem that I was talking about. Back you come. Whereby he isn't really enough as a physicist to remain involved in a sort of high octane, chasey, military threaty sort of situation in his own right. There needs to be more of this agency in him and more of the relevance to the story in him, rather than as just a sort of walking textbook and decipherer and clever person. So is there an ability involved? And then when I'm thinking in that context of the antagonist, because conspiracy and all that stuff tends to have sort of large power structures but very small active, you know, agents or groups of agents, as it were. It tends to be very asymmetrical in that regard, like hugely top heavy. It then began to seem to me that the villain, even if he had a bunch of henchmen, which inevitably he would, that he couldn't credibly stand up against such a well-resourced and well-organised and sort of jurisdictionally equipped thing as even a covert branch of the European Defence Agency. So there had to be something else here. There was something missing, and it was the same sort of flavour of thing that was missing from the physicist as a protagonist. So there is the obvious realisation, or possibility at least. Does this person, this nasty piece of work, does he also have this ability, whatever it is? So, I mean, that's super interesting. Again, you have that realization, you think, move on to something else. Don't push it, because you're going to, if you have a bit of progress like that, then you're going to hit up against the wall 30 seconds later, because these things come periodically. They don't come in 2s and 3s and 4s. So at this point, I would look back at my outline and start to think, well, what can I expand here? We've just sort of thought the antagonist probably going to have a bunch of people going around with him or her. Turned out to be him in this case. Do I want to start expanding in the same way? I didn't really feel ready to do that, because the sort of sub-villains are more functional elements in a scene rather than characters per se, particularly when you've got a two-level structure of antagonists and protagonists. I could start to address the inevitable, you know, a captain obviously has subordinates, so there's going to be more people in here. But and that's something you could do, and you would set aside a session to do it. I didn't really particularly feel like that at the time, as I recall, and it's not really necessary in this video to go into it. What I did start doing at that stage was thinking about settings, because we are going to be globetrotting and jumping all about, but bear in mind that that protagonist, that me, has to be, the way story structure works is there has to be, you know, the inciting event that pulls the protagonist from normal life, whatever that was, into the events of the tale. The sort of point of no return, everything changes for them, and the roller coaster ride begins. So it seemed to me like I could start to sort of flesh out multiple settings, and what I would do is actually, you know what, I probably wouldn't do that. I'd probably be quite specific and make this the first one of my sub entries. Different visual style just for the sake of it. and go along here. Actually, this is another example of wanting to insert a new page, isn't it? So I would do that here, and this is going to be a, oops, that was not the pages icon, that's the templates icon. It's just adjacent to it. This changes the page template, and it can also, if you're using a multi-page template like a PDF, it can insert pages. But this one, as the icon in fairness does imply, multiple pages, that lets you fiddle with the pages. And I want to insert one after this for another sort of sub setting. So again, insert after, right there. And since it's me, effectively, the protagonist, I mean, I wanted somewhere in Scotland, and why not? If you want a beautiful city, though it is not my home city, I'm a Glasgow lad, but it is my home city in the sense that we've lived here for quite some time, but Glasgow will always be my first love. But why wouldn't you have Edinburgh as a setting? Why the hell not? And you can see that including the dot creates this nice sort of hierarchy. There's another viewing mode where you can view it like columns, which is weird as hell to me, to be honest. I don't get it, but if for some reason you want to do that, then you can. Please tell me in the comments to this video why that's a thing. I don't get it at all. So strange. But yes, let's do something in Edinburgh. And then after that I would start adding more. I do remember that, I mean, here I started adding specific places that I want to have scenes in, because as soon as you put a place that you think, there's this big parking garage that I want to do stuff in, and there's this particular street, the actual name of the street at the time, and it was a phone box and I wanted to use, and so on. So you start adding that stuff. But I remember that for some reason, thinking about the earliest setting, because this is the setting for chapter 1. There was a prologue before, of course, as well, but the setting for chapter 1 was Edinburgh. I remember that my mind flashed then to the very end of the book, and you create a new page and link it in. Won't spoil it for now, but it's where the cover scene with the dramatic storm over a big churchy thing takes place, and that's how I sort of broached it, basically. We're making great progress, and I've got quite a lot here, quite a lot to work with. Certainly got a much better idea than we did however long ago I've been recording, 45 minutes, something like that. And the next thing that you would start to do once you got more of these pieces in order, I think, would be to jump to the very end and actually start an outline. You could readily do that on this device. No problem at all. You have the question of then transplanting it into a computer, but you get text recognition, and you can also frankly just work from your outline. Have this thing sitting beside your computer. I think that'd be more comfortable, honestly. I do tend to write by having my outline for the next scene or so as bullet points at the bottom of a document in Ulysses on my computer, and blank space above it, and I write and I write and I write until I get to the events of a bullet point, write it in, delete the bullet point, and keep going. So I'm always writing towards the next thing I know has to happen, and I know that when all the bullets are gone, I've finished the scene. I only write in scenes. I don't write or think in chapters. I write an entire draft, the whole book, and then assemble scenes into chapters based on where I feel it works best in terms of the flow of the narrative and cliffhangers and all that. So you might want to try that if you haven't before. I know some people like to think in chapters. I just don't. That feels like an oddly constraining, arbitrary thing to do, but do what works for you. If I was doing an outline on this, I would think about the story structure. You've virtually always got a 3-act structure. I like to do the sort of 3 star for a footnote, 3 asterisk kind of act, in that it's actually sort of 5s. You've got a prologue, and then Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and an epilogue. Prologue and epilogue are extremely short, a couple of thousand words, and then the vast majority of the book is in that 3-act structure, which is in approximately a 25%, 50%, 25% distribution. And I would just make a, as we've done before, prologue and link that up. Oops, that was not a lasso thing. Generally helps to start the lasso far away from your 2 fingers, because what this thing is doing all the time is trying to reject your palm. And if you're sort of like doing the 2-finger on-screen gesture for the lasso, but you're in the shadow of the palm rejection zone based on the hand dominance you've chosen, right, for me, then it can fail to recognize that it's intended as a lasso gesture. You can of course also just switch to the lasso tool there, but I'm using the gestures because I quite like it. And then I would start probably breaking it into scenes and just making bullets. And then I would do another one of these for Act 1. Probably draw a horizontal line between scenes. Just not get too worried about how it goes. You can easily add another page at any point to add additional thoughts. And of course, linking back and forth. I did know that, and imagine we'd done the whole thing and then got to epilogue. You quite often, it's funny, you quite often have ideas for the end of the story when much of the middle of it is up in the air and you've no idea. I think I've probably missed that full G there. You can just kind of get an idea because the stroke is outside. Let's see if we can do that a wee bit better. That's a wee bit better. But I remember for the epilogue that I was thinking, like, should I play with this sort of time reversal causality thing? Should we have an epilogue that goes back to the start or refers back to, you know, chapter 1 in some way? And that was something that I marked up to come back to, which I would do in that way with a star here. And you do that throughout your outline as well, and you'd end up with this list of stuff to address, and you could easily jump to that and do something with it, transplant it somewhere else to take action on in some way. If you wanted to do it as a checklist, the stuff that you needed to sort of knock out, then you can, what I would do on the Supernote is grab it like that, but go for this wee calendar icon and make a task out of it. And you can make lists, you know, sort of like custom categories of to do in the to do app. I'm not actually going to do that right now, but you can always access the task, the to do app right there in the sidebar. You could do it that way, or you could just keep it right here in this format, and whenever you've suitably addressed it in your outline, you can just delete this just like anything else. You know, the eraser works on stars as well, and it does get rid of them from that wee list. So slightly contrived example, but that is very much how I would use these features, and the Supernote's very fluid, infinite stack of paper, get out of your way kind of approach. One part of this interface that I have noticeably not touched upon is keywords. And keywords, let's say a wee bit about that. Keywords are interesting because you can apply them in 2 ways. You can either, you know, apply them to a particular bit of handwriting or drawing, to strokes, you know, with the K there, and it interprets it if it's handwriting. You can add it You get a recently used list here, just like, you know, tags on a computer or whatever. And then you can, you know, search by them in that interface. So you can add them to specific bits of the strokes, the handwriting, but you can also add a keyword to a whole page, and you do that by expanding the toolbar. This is like a continuation of the toolbar, and there's a add keyword option just there, and that associates the keyword not with a particular thing on the page, but with the page as a whole. And you can search for them and manage them and so on. And what I find super useful when you're outlining from the point of view of keywords, and what I would use the keyword feature on the Supernote for, is it's about the balance of the narrative. So there's 3 keywords that are super useful, and that's protag, antag. You can fill those in if it's offensive to you to not have the full words, and conflict. And what you do is, whenever you have a scene, you apply protagonist if the scene takes place from the perspective of a protagonist character. Any protagonist character, if you have multiple protagonists. Similarly for antagonists, and if there is conflict in the scene, commonly between protagonists and antagonists, then you apply the conflict tag. And what that lets you do when you then look through your outline, or indeed even look through your manuscript, if you've applied the tags in some way in your word processor, which you can do in Ulysses to Sheets, it lets you see whether there's balance between how much time you're spending with protagonists and antagonists, and whether there is a reasonable distribution of conflict, so that what you're looking to avoid is spending too much time with protagonists or with antagonists, and what you're looking to avoid with conflict, monitoring the conflict frequency, is of course you're looking to avoid uneven pacing. You don't want long, slow, empty of conflict type periods, or if you find that you have them, that is a big sort of at least amber flag that you need to look at, maybe rejigging things in terms of order, or picking up the pace in some places, or cutting out some dead stuff, so that you've got a sort of, if not completely consistent, like metronomic pace of conflict, at least an intentional one that follows the overall story structure. So these are the keywords that I would be using, and of course, you know, they're keywords. You can use anything for any number of other associated or orthogonal tracking purposes, whatever you find useful, and you're going to find them all right in here once you've actually applied them. So these are like pretty concrete ways that you can use the features in the Supernote to do something as pretty complex as planning a big old novel, and these devices are fantastic for that sort of thing. And to have it all in this beautiful writing experience with such a lovely feeling to the hand, and so portable and so beautiful, is a fabulous thing. So there you go. That is not only how I plan books, but also a slightly retconned example of how I use the Supernote. The actual use case is completely genuine, even though the book, of course, has long since been planned and written and released and all that sort of thing. It gives you a wee idea of how the features that Rata have put into the Supernote interface have an actual practical application when you're doing a fairly large scale bit of thinking. So I hope that was illustrative in at least one of those axes, either planning fiction or using the Supernotes, hopefully maybe even in both in some small way. And appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I hope you will like and subscribe and indeed tune into the next one. Talk to you again soon. Take care.